Alright folks, so we have the long-awaited other World Legacy decks, at least another one of them. I've been slacking on this one because, well, Krawlers aren't great. But here we are, we got some new random support cards to actually help the deck. And it's slow, but it does the trick if the game grinds off long enough. But I do enjoy World Legacy decks. I'm glad that there's one for each kind of playstyle. So if you have a specific one, this one will be for you if you're like the slow grind game. But let's go into the deck profile. 3 copies of Krawler Spine. This is one of the better Krawlers for sure. When it's flipped face up, you can target one monster on the field, destroy that monster. And all the Krawlers share a similar effect, in which if this face-up card is sent from the field to the graveyard by opponent's card effect, you can special summon 2 Krawlers from the deck. So, provided your opponent is illiterate and can't read cards, you can plus really hard by your opponent spot removaling any of the Krawler monsters. We have ways to facilitate and proc that effect ourselves with our own main deck cards, but basically, if your opponent has to deal with them through non-battle ways, they're going to suffer horribly for it. 3 copies of Krawler Receptor. This one is a Rhoda. You add a Krawler monster from deck to hand when it's flipped face up. Nothing much to say here. It's a Rhoda. Get a card, advantage. A slower, but at least it fills your hand with more Krawlers that you can special summon with other card effects. 3 copies of Krawler Dendrite. Very simple card. When it's flipped face up, you can Foolish Burial a Krawler monster, facilitating some setup for graveyard plays with your Link monster Krawlers. So pretty self-explanatory. 3 copies of, forgive me if I say this wrong, but Glalie? I don't know. You can special summon a Krawler from your hand or graveyard when it's flipped face up. And face up attack position or defense position. So that's really good because you can special it face down, and when it's flipped face up, you get the effects. So it's a nice play extender, you know, a good 1-for-1 because your opponent will kill it and then you get special summon. So pretty standard good. 2 copies of Ranveer. This one's one of the weaker ones for sure. When it's flipped face up, you can target 2 Krawler monsters in your graveyard, add them to your hand. Whether you need some monsters in your hand for further plays or to recycle your Link monsters, this is your go-to. And finally, 2 copies of Axon. Axon just destroys a spell or trap on the field. You can target it, of course, but just something that's not as important. More Krawler names. More importantly, we have 2 copies of Deus Ex Krawler. Now, I don't run a third one because it can be a bit bricky from the opening hand, but this is their boss monster. When your opponent activates a card or effect that targets it when it's face down, as a quick effect, it flips face up. And the minute it flips face up, it negates all monster effects on the field that your opponent controls. So this card is a giant booty floodgate. It is really good. Negating all of your opponent's activated monster effects is just nuts. And if they don't read the card, they're just going to play their monsters. They're going to do some shenanigans, and they're going to realize, oh crap, my monsters don't actually do anything. So if you can get this out unimpeded, it is a really good win condition. It also has another effect that if it's destroyed by battle card effect, unlike the other Krawlers, this one adds a level 9 monster from your deck with a different type and attribute. It's meant to synergize with other World Legacy cards, but we're not going to use that for this deck. For the spells, we have 3 copies of their field spell, World Legacy in Shadow. This is one of the cards you're going to want to see as soon as possible. It allows you to special summon a Krawler in face-up attack position or defense face-down defense position, or rather a level 2 or lower insect monster, which all of your Krawlers are level 2. So special summons them from your hand. They gain a little attack boost of 300 attack and defense. And if your opponent's illiterate, when a flip monster is destroyed by battle with an opponent's monster, you can send that monster to the graveyard. So it's non-targeting, non-destruction removal, which is really good, but it has to die by battle. So again, if your opponent is dumb, you will definitely plus hard off of your monster's destructions. We run 2 copies of World Legacy Survivor. This is an interesting card. You can excavate the top 5 cards of your deck, and if you do that, add a Krawler monster or World Legacy card. So this lets you fix your hand a little bit, search for key crawler monsters or support cards, and the remaining cards go to the graveyard, which sets up some crawlers to be special summoned from the graveyard, so could be pretty useful. And it also works with some other World Legacy cards. Also, for the rest of this turn, you can't special summon monsters from the extra deck, but we're a slower deck, so using this turn 1 is not a big deal. It restricts you to Link monsters, not really a bad thing. The 1 copy of Terraform for the field spell. Triple copies of Wormbait. This card saw no play and only had 1 printing, but since the reprint, still no play. But in Krawlers, this is really good for getting Link material. If you control an insect monster, you special summon 2 tokens, and they can be used for Link fodder. Those tokens are insect types, so it can be used for your Krawlers. And more importantly, you cannot normal or special summon any level 3 or 4 monsters the turn you activate this card. But who cares, because we don't run them. So run it to your heart's content, not once per turn. 2 copies of Pot of Desires. I was running 3 at one point, but I decided to keep it at 2. It's just, you don't want to see more of this card when you play it. And you really want to see other cards that help you protect your Krawlers or set up your plays. So running at 3 seems a little excessive. I like running the 2. Never becomes an issue, but we need more resources because we're a slower deck. 3 copies of World Legacy's Mind Meld. This card is what helps force your opponent to send your Krawlers back to the hand. Basically, when your opponent activates a monster effect, while I control a Krawler monster, you can make that effect to become return 1 face-up monster to the hand. So that monster has to be your opponent's monster, and since it's your opponent's monster effect, you send the card back to your hand, which activates the Krawler's effects to special summon 2 from the deck. Not only that, but it has a graveyard effect that you can banish this card from the graveyard, target a Link monster on the field, and then special summon a Krawler from your graveyard in a face-down defense position from either, from hand, deck, or graveyard to a zone it points to. So this can be used to cheat out Deuce X Krawler, one of the smaller Krawlers if you need to facilitate a specific answer to a board. This card is really good and helps really make the deck go. We have 3 copies of World Legacy Pawns. You know us, we're in Montana, it gets cold, and we burnt it with the extra bulk, so that's why I have the 1 proxy. So it is what it is. But anyway, this card is good for forcing your flip effects to go off, because you can target a face-down monster you control and change it to face-up attack position or defense position. So it'll allow your flip effects to be activated and also bring your Krawlers face up, which will then facilitate their effects to special summon from deck if your opponent spot removals them. You could also shuffle 1 monster from the graveyard into the main deck, then target 1 face-up monster you control and change it back into face-down defense position. So a little bit of recursion, extra setup. Pretty good card. You want to see it as much as possible so you can speed up your flip effect plays. We're running 3 copies of Lost Wind. I was fighting over what kind of effect negation to use, whether it be hand traps, impermanence, and I ultimately decided to go with Lost Wind because this deck doesn't gain too much advantage if your opponent knows what they're doing. So Lost Wind is just naturally a really good card to help slow down your opponent that doesn't require them to like play into it. So you can use the Lost Wind, you get to negate effects on board, help your Krawlers beat over things, and then your opponent's naturally gonna summon something from the extra deck later on, so you get this back. So it really costs you nothing, and it really has extra value in that sense. I feel like it's the best trap for monster effect negation for that sense. You really don't want to go through your resources and have to discard things for cost, so this is definitely the best way to go in my honest opinion. And then finally, 2 Heavy Storm Dusters. Back row is still relevant in this meta. We can't afford Twin Twisters with the card discarding, like I stated, for the reason why we run Lost Wind. So Heavy Storm Duster is a really good way to do that. We're a go first, slower deck. Battle phase loss is not too big. Now for the extra deck, we're going to run the Krawlers. So we have 2 copies of Krawler Qualiarch. It requires 2 Krawler monsters, and it has a couple of different effects depending on how many Krawlers you have. If it's 2 or more, all your monsters gain a 300 attack and defense. 4 or more, your opponent cannot activate cards during the battle phase, and 6 or more, your Krawler monsters could attack directly. Rather, all your monsters, but you're going to have all Krawlers for that effect. So, pretty good card. the strongest of the Link monsters, because it itself already is 2,000. And if this face-up card is sent to the field, sent from the field to the graveyard by battle or card effect, you can special summon 2 Krawlers from the graveyard. So a little bit of recursion if your opponent has to deal with it one way or another. We have 2 copies of Neurogos, stupid name, but 2 Krawler monsters, and if this card points to Krawler monsters, they gain 300 attack and defense, and if they battle an opponent's monster, you double the battle damage they inflict. So kind of mediocre, but again, we want to use the Krawlers to bring out bigger Link monsters to then special summon them from the graveyard later. And it has the same effect if it leaves the field. Special summon 2 Krawlers from graveyard. 2 Krawler Synapsis. This is 2 Earth monsters. This is a little more generic than some of the other Krawlers, so you can go into this a little easier, but it has a pretty lackluster effect. Krawler monsters, this card points to can't be destroyed by battle, and they gain 300 attack and defense, but they can make up to 2 attacks. So if you later down the line have a couple of Krawler monsters and this on board, you can swing for game, provided your opponent has an empty board. And again, if it leaves the field, special summon 2 Krawlers. Mrs. Radiant, 2 of them. Again, Krawlers are kind of weak, so this 500 attack boost for all of them is fantastic, and has a little bit of recursion with the returning a Earth monster from your graveyard to your hand. So just a nice boost. 1 copy of Subterra Behemoth Fiendus. You won't go into this one too often, but it does offer some bit of resource searching. Basically, during your main phase, you can send a flip monster from your deck to the graveyard, so it's kind of set up, and then special summon a flip monster from your hand and face down the defense position. So a little bit of setup, a little bit of getting some fodder on board. It's just a nice one-of to have in situations, and 2,000 attack is actually nothing to scoff at for a Link 2. This card really saved the deck. Almirage, I love how it's being used in everything. So Krawlers had this really awkward play where you would normal summon a Krawler with less than 1,000 attack. You'd activate your Worm Bait, and you get 2 tokens, but you can't use those tokens to make Quality Arc that points downwards, because it is the only Krawler that points downwards. So with Almirage, what this allows us to do is you can normal summon your Krawler, use Worm Bait, get your 2 tokens, and then since Almirage points down, you can then use those 2 tokens to summon Synapsis or Neguros, and now you have a viable Krawler that has effects of it pointing left and right. And then using things like Mind Meld to special summon a Krawler to a zone it points to, you now have that ability. Because before you would use the tokens to summon Negrosis up here, and then it points to nothing because it's in the extra monster zone. But now that you can get it into the main monster zone and it points left or right, this allows you to get some more value out of your World Legacy's Mind Meld a little faster. So Almirage is fantastic just for that single reason. It allows you to get your Link monsters into the main monster zone, so you can plus as hard as possible from your other monster effects. So really good card. Now for some one-ofs, we have 1 copy of Phoenix, spot removal for Spell Trap, just generic. Unicorn, again, spot removal, sometimes you really need it, so there it is. And Borolo Dragon. The deck does have a new boss monster, but sometimes it can't deal with problematic monsters that can't be destroyed, so this is the way that you're going to deal with it. And finally, a single copy of the Phantom Knights of Cursed Javelin. This card is really unique in the sense that level 2 monsters are what you main mostly, so you can detach a material to target a face-up monster on the field, make the attack 0, and have its effects negated. So really deals with problematic monsters. Krawlers have trouble with effect negation and getting over bigger monsters, so this really just helps with that overall. It's a nice one-up to have, and it comes up a lot. But that's the deck. I hope you guys enjoyed, and leave any comments or suggestions down below as always. Thank you.